Hello, hello, hello. We are back. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, episode 70, in fact. If you're looking to boost your communication skills, if you're looking to build better habits, if you're looking to connect with people on a different level, then the podcast is for you. And it's where connection and communication meet coaching. I'm your host, Podge, a seasoned expert in health leadership and psychology. Each week, we dive into all topics related to health with a keen focus on the art of building meaningful relationships through insightful interviews and practical advice. I believe that everyone has a great story to tell, and by learning from each other, we can not only enhance our own lives, but also strengthen our communities and how we connect with others. So join me on this journey of connection and of growth. Before we do get started, and I'm very excited to welcome my guest in today, who is having some technical difficulties when it comes to finding the live conversation. I think you got it. Okay, so you're obviously listening to us live on the Noom Vibe app, where we explore the fascinating world of health and habit formation. For those of you who are maybe new to the platform, Noom Vibe is the free new community wellness app from Noom. At the Noom Vibe community, we're all on a shared mission to live better, longer lives. And Noom Vibe is actually the app that pays you to live better. And you can earn rewards from our step tracker and build out healthy habits like your workout routine, your water intake, meditation. It also allows you to connect us with this wonderful community and much, much more. Remember, you can only catch these episodes live on Noom Vibe, and you even get the opportunity to join in as a guest. If you're listening to this recording on Spotify or YouTube, I highly encourage you to download the Noom Vibe app to get the live and real experience. Speaking of joining as a guest, I have a really wonderful guest who I am going to leave into the conversation here in just one moment. But right now, I want to introduce you all to Rae, a dynamic and compassionate individual whose journey has been shaped by a deep commitment to helping others. Growing up as an only child in the Midwest, Rae cultivated a strong sense of creativity and empathy, values instilled by her close-knit family. Recognized for her early volunteer work, Rae's passion and supporting her community has only grown stronger over time. And I cannot wait for you to hear some of the things that Rae has done. I feel like she's lived many lives already. Rae's path through college was one of exploration, kind of ultimately earning degrees in business and commercial recreation, a blend that reflects her belief in balancing work and play. So this unique foundation prepared her for a life of service, especially during the 9 years her husband served in the military. During this time, Rae became a certified personal trainer and nutritionist, launching her own consulting business to support military families. Currently thriving in her role at Noom, Rae continues to empower others as a health and wellness coach and leader, recognized for her exceptional contributions to the company, and I can definitely attest and speak firsthand to that one. A lifelong learner and avid reader, Rae has also authored two wellness journals and maintains a fantastic blog which is focused on personal growth. Now back in the Midwest, she is exploring app development and leading community wellness initiatives. Rae's story is an absolute testament to characteristics like resilience, empathy, and the power of intentional living. Rae, I am very, very excited to leave you into the conversation. I'm very excited to dive into our topic later today. But first, I'd love for the audience to just get to learn more about you. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm hoping that it's coming through, getting into app development, but it's slow because I am not super tech savvy. So thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and for welcoming me in today.
No worries. And there is a feature on this app where people can leave kind of emojis or hearts or can even ask me questions. So if you do have any questions for Rae, you can just direct message them to me by clicking on the say hi button. But already, Rae, as I was reading out your introduction, like it's slightly distracting, but also really heartwarming. I can see just the flood of emojis kind of popping up on the screen, which is really nice.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you everyone who's here listening, and we'll see if we can inspire some people today and maybe get us thinking in a way we haven't before.
Yeah, I think so too. And I really we will spend some time kind of focusing on the topic around kind of suffering and suffering effectively. And people are probably wondering, like, what are you talking about? Like, there should be no suffering. But before we do, Rae, just even reading your bio, your journey has been incredibly diverse from supporting military families to just empowering people in their health and wellness journeys at Noom and becoming a leader. Like, what inspired you to want to dedicate your life to helping others? And maybe how did some of the experiences we discussed and some we're about to discuss, how did they help shape you into the person you are today?
That's a great question. I don't think any of it started out intentional. Like when you're in primary school, you're not like, I'm gonna go, help people because it makes me feel good. You just kind of do it because as a kid, you're just going and doing what feels good and what's fun. My dad was a teacher, and my grandparents were teachers, and they really liked those aha moments. In coaching, we call those generative moments. They liked seeing kids light up, learn things, and figure out that they're going to be okay in whatever area they're in. And I saw that, and I know my parents did that with me. So they kind of gave me creative freedom to just go out and figure out how I can help others get those. And I think that's where, I started making greeting cards when I was a kid, and I just gave them to people who I thought needed a little boost, a little happy in their life. I volunteered with the United Way, which is a volunteer organization that essentially connects community leaders with community members in need. And I was recognized in my community for that. Again, it felt good, and I just wanted more of that feel good. But then it was less about me and more about the other people, because as I grew up, went through high school, graduated college, and my husband got us into the world of the military. There are so many people from so many different walks of life, and everybody is going through something different, and it's a completely different lifestyle and culture, where I was adjusting myself there. I didn't know how to find those feel good moments. So you just kind of sit quiet with yourself and you listen to those around you, like, where is the need? And that's again when I started getting into the nutrition and the personal trainers, because there was a need around that. And it kept going from there, where there's a movie called Robots, if anybody's into cartoons from the 90s, where it's like, see a need, fill a need. And that's really where it was. It started as a kid where it felt good, but then it came to, well, I'm not doing good if people don't need the good that I'm bringing. So what do people need? And that's really how it started.
Yeah, so like your family have been a huge inspiration. Like I really love the stories how from even such a young age, like the idea of creating and giving greeting cards to people, I just think kind of speaks to the vocation. Like the area you're in is really a vocation and something that you love to do. And it's funny, like not funny, it's really cool to see how it's progressed throughout your life. And there's something to that, I know you really do it for the person, but there is something psychological or something really fulfilling and joyous when you are supporting others as well. Not only are you giving to them, but you actually also get a lot back in return too, don't you?
Absolutely. I'm not really one for spotlight. So if I can boost people up and help them on the back end, that's what I really liked about like recreation, event management, things like that, is you put in all this work on the back end just so people on the front end can have a bunch of fun. You can see that.
Yeah.
But you're not out there like, you have fun over here, and you just kind of give people that platform. And that's always been something that I really enjoy. I'm not, as a kid with the greeting cards, it was kind of like, here's something, you think about it, you have it, you look at it when you need it, but I'm going to be really hands off at this point. It's like I've created a portal for you to jump through and do what's fun on the other side, or get what you need from it.
Yeah, like the phrase often coined is you're a guide on the side versus like a sage on the stage. You're really
Yes.
facilitating and guiding. And I think that those concepts like really align. And obviously you're a driving factor in terms of like the leadership at Noom, kind of the coaching product as well at Noom. And I don't want to make it specific to your role right now, but because you do so many different types of things with your blog, and you've working with the military as well. But what can you add on to, like, what do you truly love about the work that you're doing right now? Is there something more to it? We've already mentioned like the vocation and how inspiring it is to probably just see people get breakthroughs as well. But is there anything else?
Oh, there's so much that I love. And not just specific to Noom, it's in my pastimes as well. I like diversity. I like discovery. I like figuring out. I wouldn't say it's like a mechanical sort of thing, because again, not super tech savvy. If you tear things apart and give me a schematic, it's not going to go back together the right way. So it's more of the creative side. And how does this look? How does this feel? How can we play with this to give the best and biggest impact. I think that's what I really like about my role is it's kind of every time there's a new project, something new you can discover, it's never been done before. So there, you have to figure out the right way by going through all the wrong ways, because again, it's never been done, and always keeping that open curiosity of how can it be done better. I love that at work, because again, needs of people change and develop, and you kind of have to be agile and willing to move into those spaces where you know, yeah, we've done things the same way for the last 5 years, but now I need to get creative because it's not working anymore for the demographic or the group or the program. So I think just that ability to be creative, that autonomy to just push buttons until something breaks, I really like that in all aspects of life. That's what keeps me engaged is having enough autonomy to go in and just put my own spin on it without, without ruining anybody else's experience, hopefully making it better, honestly.
Yeah, and I think on top of that as well, you come in with that creative mindset, but the work that you're in, like having that creative, it's almost like on par with a growth mindset, right? Being able to see failure as something that is probably going to happen, but it's not really like I have failed, it's binary, I can't. It's more of like a learning opportunity. And I think that's one thing I did appreciate from your leadership, and when we were able to work more closely a few years ago, is like you do come with serious creativity and a lot of kind of outside of the box thinking. So I think it's really apparent you spend, maybe it's fun for you, like you can talk to me here about this, but you spend a lot of time, and it seems like you're very intentional about allowing yourself to be creative and allowing to think of problems or things to work on from different lights.
Absolutely. There is no I can't do it. It's I can't do it yet. I haven't figured it out yet. There is no finite, well, that didn't work. It's more of like, well, that didn't work, so let's try this. It's like you said, there's no ending point. And I do find a lot of fun in that. And I enjoy continuing education part of it too, of, if you don't know something, you have to figure it out. When I was in college, one of my professors said, the best ideas are borrowed. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's probably something out there that tells me how to do what I'm trying to do. But then once I have that information, I can bring my own spin on it. And that's the fun part is there's always the more you know, the more you can create your own view. And I think that's really powerful, especially in leadership or as you're trying to learn new things or change your life or, again, move through suffering, is you have to have that mindset of where I'm at is not where I'm going to be when I get to where I want to be. And I have to try things outside of my box, outside of what I've been trying to get there. It's very much of, well, that didn't work, but there's always that, but what can we do now?
I like the aspect you're saying about you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, because I think there is a sense of pressure, especially if you're maybe trying to cultivate a business or kind of start something. You want to be niche. I think there is that pressure to be like, I have to do something that no one is doing, but not always the case. You can actually learn from people who are in similar realms to you or the areas, and then, like you said, you can put your own personal spin on it. Then I think that is way less daunting. Like I've even experienced it too with this podcast and trying to develop it out. It's like, how can I be different from everyone and just be like my own little niche? Like sometimes it's really hard. A lot of people talk about health and wellness topics as well. So how can you learn from the people you're maybe aspire to be, and then put your own kind of natural personality or natural twist on it too? I think that's way less daunting than trying to come up with something that no one else has ever thought of ever. That's a pretty scary task.
Yes. And a way to look at it too, because I think this relates to, I know a lot of your focus is on how to have intentional fun. And I think a lot of it is people have these expectations. Like, I have to do this. I don't have time for fun. I have to do this because it's going to make me the most money. I think if we approach it from that perspective of you, the collective you, not you specifically, but you are unique just by existing. So even if you talk about the same topic that somebody else is talking about, you're going to use your own words. You're going to use your own personality. And then there will be people who prefer you specifically over somebody else who may be talking about the same topic. Again, it's just what resonates with you and it goes back to what feels good. Showing up authentically, I think, is a huge thing. Faking it till you make it is great, but at some point you're going to have to start being genuine and vulnerable and letting people know that you're learning with them and you're just there to support. It's not a competition. It's not, I'm going to push you off the rock so I can stand on it. It's more like, how can we get all the rocks for everybody to find the right rock for them, and we'll all be standing on rocks like weird little penguins out in the field. Like there's no wrong way to do it, and that's the beauty of life, is you got to find what works for you.
Yeah, like you said, there's plenty, whatever you deem it, if you deem it success or just like there's enough people around, you don't have to be in competition with everyone. I understand there's certain aspects where you feel you might be in a very, very similar line of business with someone, but very oftentimes actually you can actually leverage each other, to both be successful as well. So I like that little twist on it too. And when you approach problems, then I think that's a lot easier, right? If I'm approaching a problem saying there's all these people in similar boats, I can collaborate with them versus like, oh, I can't give away my secrets to that person, or I can't talk to them because they'll steal my ideas, or how can I steal their ideas and be better? It doesn't really work like that because you're not authentic. And I think that's a really core component that you mentioned as well. In order to be like truly successful, I think you have to be really authentic as well.
Absolutely. And that's not to say go and spill all your cards or lay them all out on the table. It's just there's a balance between, don't, going back to suffering here, but don't suffer in silence, but don't overshare. You gotta find that happy medium.
Just before we do move on to our topic around suffering effectively, in your bio, it mentions about a community well-being support you're giving through your local library. That just like struck my interest as something you're doing recently. What can you tell me more?
Yes, so I love the library. I would move into the back corner if they let me. I love the library. If you guys are not members of your local library, please go. It's free. And it's not just books. There's so many wonderful things at the library. Libraries are my happy place. So the fact that the library was willing to partner with me and give me the opportunity to come and run a program for my community, I am still just tickled pink that they were open to the idea. So my library runs programs. They're basically free. You sign up if you want to go. They have them on all different topics. I went to one recently, Parks and Rec, like the TV show. They had a cover band. They had like the show showing on the TV screen. You could make buttons. They had candy. It was all themed, super cute. And then I also went to one on like hauntings of the Great Lakes. So like they have the wide variety. They have music. They've got just so many things. I'm going to gush about my library forever. But I reached out to the library director and I asked if the community could benefit from something along the lines of just kind of an introductory course of setting goals, practicing self-compassion, and kind of setting yourself up for success. We realize that most people look for this in the new year, so I'm not going to be running my program until January, but that gives me plenty of time to kind of collect what the themes are this year, do some research on what most people are looking for, what the struggles are. Obviously, it would be a different presentation, like right after post-COVID, different needs, or like any other year, there's always themes. So this January, I will be speaking at my library, offering people, I think I'm going to have some worksheets on how to, set effective goals, maybe some activities that they can take home, or some resources that they can use later if they're finding that they're being a bit hard on themselves. That self-compassion piece is really key when you're setting new goals and you're trying to reach new heights. It's going to be a short introductory program, so if folks want more, which I'm hoping they do, then I can do some deeper dives on some of these more specific topics. But I want to introduce people on how to set healthy boundaries for themselves while still accelerating their life.
That's incredibly powerful. And what I love is you're actually getting into the nitty-gritty of your community and doing it from there.
Absolutely. I've only lived in this area for a couple of years, so I'm finally to the point where I'm settled enough. I have a general understanding of the layout of things where I can start giving back and start making those connections and not being so just a tourist in my own city kind of thing. So I'm really hoping that even if people come and they don't get much out of it, that next time I'm at the library, if I see them, I can be like, hey, I now recognize you. I see you as a person. We are in a community together. Is there anything that we can do for each other to, just make the space around us better?
Yeah, it's a wonderful way to establish yourself in a new community. And it does tie in very nicely with kind of, I can see it, when you gave kind of like your life path in terms of the things that you love to do. I think just being around people and helping people is obviously at that core. And by taking those actions, going to the library of all spots, which is like a hub, is it still I hope it's still considered a hub even in today's age. But yeah, that's really valuable work.
I agree. Librarians, they do so much. They, again, like you said, it's a hub. It's anywhere from people who need support with financial or learning computer skills, anything like that, all the way to just more leisure activities and just kind of enjoying the community for community's sake. So yeah. I'm very excited, that it's going to be offered, and maybe it'll get people curious about other businesses in the community. Like I know there's nutrition and fitness and wellness and crafts, anything that they want to do to bring more joy to their lives. I'm hoping that they can take the information I share and go explore.
Yeah, there's no limit on that, right? I think it's really important work that you're doing as well. And like you said, you never know the impact. And that's something we say on this show a lot, is if someone comes on and speaks in front of a few hundred listeners or however many listeners there is in a podcast, like you just don't know if it affects one person. To me, that's time we've all spent that's worth it,
Absolutely.
All right, Rae, let's just take a slight detour and we'll get on to our topic of discussion today. And my first very pointed question to you is, how do people suffer effectively?
Oh, I mean, I want to caveat that this is all very individual. So this is not a one size fits all. You have to suffer the way everyone suffers. Suffering is the state of undergoing pain, distress, and hardship. And I'm using it as a verb. So thinking of it as something you do. You undergo this pain, distress, and hardship. And that can be from so many things. Suffering is inevitable. It's beyond our control. It's uniquely experienced. So everyone who experiences suffering, which by the way is everyone suffers, you're going to experience it. It's your own experience. You own that experience. It's not something typically that, even if we're going through the same suffering, you will experience it different than I will, based on, everything that we've grown through as people. Personally, I think suffering is a bit of an ego-based experience, because suffering comes to us when we have certain expectations and the reality is not meeting those expectations. And it's typically the ego that comes in and says, protect self, figure out how to, whether you play the blame game or you, woe is me, whatever it is, your ego is the one who's responding to that. What's required when you're suffering is realignment. And that's something that we can control. Suffering is not grief. And again, this is very high level because you can be suffering from grief, but let's keep it in the verb. So you can be suffering or you can be grieving. So grief is not the same as suffering. And I want to make that point very early on, because grief, while it is something that we all experience, it's also unique. There's a lot of overlap. Grief is this emotional and physical pain that's associated with loss, not misalignment. Well, we could have had these things that we were, I hope this wouldn't have happened, but it did. That's not quite the same as the misalignment. Loss is, again, something that we can't control, but it's a nonlinear process to move through grief, and you can't rush it. You can't control it. You can't fix it. It's got to be carried, and something that takes time before your feelings can lighten there. I like the analogy of a broken car is like suffering and a broken leg is like grief. With a broken car and a broken leg, yeah, you can't really do much. You've got two broken things. But with a broken leg, you can't go to the doctor and say, I need this fixed by tomorrow. Whereas with a broken car, you can go to a mechanic and say, I need this fixed by tomorrow. With a broken leg, you're gonna have these pains 6 years from now after the leg is healed. It's something about broken bones. They tell you when it's gonna rain, whatever it is, it stays with you like grief. Whereas the broken car, hopefully you're not thinking about it 10 years from now. Whatever happened to that car, whether you still drive it or you don't have it, it's not something that takes up space. So that's a big difference on grief and suffering. But back to suffering, what you're saying of like how to suffer effectively. I have a few tips and tricks. on what I think that really helps most people.
Before we it just like you're just blowing my mind with the amount of information. I'm trying to like hold on to questions and go back to them. So if I can just maybe recap or maybe ask some spin-off questions. So what it sounds like, and I love that analogy, by the way. So suffering, it sounds like suffering is maybe something, it's more within our control in terms of like it's our internal narratives. It's like how we think through problems, like we can affect it that way. Whereas grief, like, yes, I guess like how we overcome grief has to do with our internal narratives too, but it's more of a perhaps a life event that we have to live with, as opposed to suffering as something we can create strategies around to mitigate and be able to process through. Whereas you're kind of normalizing like grief is normal. Like if someone really close to you passes away and you feel sad that they've passed away in 10 years' time, that is normal. You're not expected to forget about the person. You're not expected to get over it. Whereas suffering, when you use the analogy of the car, like I could choose not to get my car fixed and drive around and it probably conks out or breaks on occasion like that. It's my choice to bring it to the mechanic or not. And well, I suppose sometimes people mightn't realize that they can bring it to the mechanic, or they mightn't realize that there's a way out, but we can dive into that later. So around suffering, it really sounded to me you tend to suffer if, like you said, your expectations don't match the reality. And that to me plays into a lot of what you mentioned around misalignment. So if I am wanting to be a certain person or feel I should be a certain person, but the actions I'm taking or the things that are occurring in my life are not matching that alignment piece or who I want to be, that creates like almost a sense of friction. And now, depending on how I respond, can lead to suffering.
Absolutely. So I think we all have the power to control our responses to suffering. And we do that by adapting healthy coping strategies. Whereas with grief, we don't necessarily have that control unless you're coping in an unhealthy way. Like when you get hit with a bout of grief and you feel the need to cry or you feel sad or whatever it is, that's not something that you can necessarily control. With emotions, I'm all about feel what you feel when you feel it. Don't unpack and live there. And that goes back to suffering. If you feel awful because you're suffering through something, feel that. Just don't unpack and live there. Adopt some healthy coping strategies to acknowledge that you are suffering, figure out what you need to do to move through it, and manage that discomfort in a healthy way.
Yeah, like you said with the verb, like you can say that I am suffering at this moment, but you're not a person who like suffers indefinitely. And even if, as you gave the example of certain emotions, I could feel them kind of passing through me versus like sitting there and just staying in that moment.
Absolutely, yes. And anything you feel, again, emotions, you have to acknowledge those feelings. You definitely do not want to ignore the feelings. I think a lot of time with suffering, when we're suffering ineffectively, we either don't acknowledge that we're suffering and it becomes this horrible, it's your fault, this is the problem. It's not something that people take ownership of, and they get these faux feelings, these feelings that aren't necessarily real, and they latch onto those versus really acknowledging those more authentic feelings, where maybe you show up and you're angry because this happened to you and you're now suffering because of it. Well, really the real feelings are that you felt slighted, or you felt embarrassed, or you felt left out. Like those more vulnerable feelings are things that we need to start acknowledging in order to feel more to move through suffering effectively.
You mentioned the ego. Is that where the ego kicks in? Like
Ego,
it's hard
yes.
to acknowledge those like that those vulnerable kind of states that you're in, and it's easy to maybe project it as anger instead.
Yes, the ego, there's so many resources on ego. And it's really a fascinating thing. So if this is something that piques your interest, I encourage you to get out there and look at some of like Eckhart Tolle's work. That's a good place to start. But there's a lot of great work on there. But the ego really is, it's this part of yourself that wants to protect you. Basically, you can do no wrong, and you are the center of the universe, and you shall shine forth. And when anything threatens that, the egos comes in as this big green monster of, nope, that's not how I'm feeling. You're the problem. You have to fix it because I did nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with me. And a lot of our culture says, if you're feeling some of those vulnerable emotions, we don't know how to talk about it, which makes it even harder. And two is that you're not using gender, but you're not manly if you feel these emotions, or you're not capable if you feel these emotions. And that part of our core being, again, the ego resonates or latches onto these, I am this, this, and this. and anything outside of that is wrong and threatening. And it makes it really hard to, again, sit with those harder emotions and acknowledge those feelings that don't necessarily align with who your best self or who you think you really should be.
There's definitely like a societal component to it as well. Like you said, it's hard to talk about certain kind of feelings or emotions, but there also seems to be a severe coping mechanism there, right? It's easier for me to pass blame on someone else versus me taking autonomy and control over certain things that have occurred.
Yes, and that's part of ineffective suffering. You can't control other people. So waiting for somebody else to fix something that's within you, you feel those things. Other people don't feel those things. That's ineffective, and that's going to prolong your suffering because you're waiting for someone else to do something that they may not understand or prioritize.
Yeah, sometimes on the show I use kind of the example in psychology attribution theory. So like the classic example is someone in a car cuts you off. Your initial reaction is, "Oh, you so and so, beep beep beep." Like, what are you doing? Versus taking a step back and saying, "Okay, like I don't know what is happening with that person. Maybe they're rushing to bring a loved one to a hospital. Maybe something else severe is going on in their life." Like we often don't think through that lens. Like our jerk reaction is like, speaking of jerk, like you are a jerk and beeping the horn and kind of giving out to them. And I think it is important when we're talking about suffering too. Our initial reaction could be, and it's probably some way natural, is it? I'm guessing because it happens so often. It
Oh
could be
yeah.
very natural to say, "Oh, this happened because of that person," versus like, "Why did I react that way?" And thinking more introspectively.
Absolutely. And I think that's a survival technique that we will never lose as a species. We have to have those knee-jerk reactions to keep us safe. But the beauty of how we've evolved is kind of what you're saying is you can maintain that genuine, not toxic, but genuine positive attitude, giving people the benefit of the doubt, figuring out, what can I accomplish in this situation? Like what is honking going to accomplish? Is that really what I want? Best case scenario, nothing. Worst case scenario, they whip around and come after you. Like that's not what you want to happen. So just kind of thinking of how can your experience of suffering, whatever you're going through, help others. Maybe you now give this car more space, so the people behind you also have more space from this person who's experiencing something. And just kind of thinking again through what you can bring, like what are my strengths, what are my skills, what do I value? So when this person cuts me off, my knee-jerk reaction is to be violent, choose violence that day. But is that what you want to be known for? Is that something that resonates with you? Are you typically an aggressive person? Is that how you want to, again, show up? Because if not, you're out of alignment with yourself and you prolong the suffering.
Such a good way to think through it though, isn't it? Like, is this the person that I want to be? Is what I'm doing in this moment meshing with the person that I want to become, either in the near future, in the distant future? And that can help guide you really, really effectively.
Absolutely. And then if it's not, or if you don't know who you want to be, staying flexible and curious, and then seeking that support from other people who may have gone through it. Again, that community component is just, you got to be open to, does this feel good? Because suffering doesn't feel good. And the goal to suffer effectively is to move through it quickly. So if it doesn't feel good, being flexible, being curious, and seeking that support of like, hey, I experienced this. I don't know how to react. Have you ever experienced something like that? Like, can we workshop this? How could I have navigated that without it ruining the rest of my morning? Those kinds of things. I think that's another component that as a society, we want to keep it close to us. We don't want to tell people we're suffering, we're struggling, we're not doing okay, because it might seem silly or trivial, or we don't want to bother people, or whatever the reason is. But seeking support from anyone that you think might be able to at least hear you. Sometimes just auditory processing is a huge relief. But definitely thinking of, is this how I want to feel? Is this who I want to be? Because again, we can't avoid suffering. It's going to come. And the more we practice that self-compassion, the easier it's going to be the next time somebody cuts you off.
Yeah, and like you said, it doesn't have to be, if I come to you, I don't have to say, "Rae, I'm suffering, I need you to fix it." It can just be, "I need you
Right.
to just hear me." Like I just need to tell someone, like, you don't have to solve it for me. I just need you to be there by my side.
Absolutely. And part of suffering effectively includes emotional intelligence, which is another topic all by itself. But emotional intelligence is something it's a tool that we can use to understand, use, and manage our emotions in those positive ways. So again, it all lines up. But part of suffering effectively is to have that self-awareness of what do you need, and self-regulation. Can you regulate it yourself? Figuring out what techniques and coping mechanisms work for you. I cannot remember what author, but it's basically, even if you're using not necessarily healthy coping mechanisms, if you recognize that of like, I realize this is not the best coping technique, but it's the best I have right now. And I need to be regulated before this meeting, or I need to be regulated before I continue driving safely. Being able to recognize that and having the ability to find that baseline so you can continue to get to a point where then you can process your emotions and figure out what's really going on.
So even if you have like less than ideal coping mechanisms, you're saying are they a good start? Is that from like a habit point of view? At least you've ingrained a habit and you can tweak it?
I think it's more from a psychological point of view where it's not constructive to beat yourself up
Right.
with a coping mechanism that's not ideal. In the example that was used, again, I think this might be from Dr. Faith G. Harper. She's written many wonderful books as well. But the concept was, I feel really crummy. I'm not doing well. I'm not handling life right now really well, and I really want to eat this donut. That is not necessarily a healthy coping technique, but by acknowledging, I understand this is not a healthy coping technique. This is not something I want to make a habit, but it's the best I have right now. Just by acknowledging that, you're becoming psychologically aware that in this moment, I need a coping technique. I do not have the tools or the resources to do something better than the behavior that I'm about to engage in, but this behavior is going to work for me right now. It's connecting those dots versus mindlessly just reaching for the donut. This is what I'm doing. I feel like garbage. I need this sweet sugar rush. By acknowledging it, you're really starting to move through and move towards healthier suffering, because you're acknowledging this isn't ideal, but I know what I'm doing and I'm going to do it today with the intention of doing better tomorrow.
It's such a mindset shift because you can go into that action, like say just eating, in terms of eating the donut, and you could feel like a severe sense of guilt, and it could probably just add to your frustrations, versus that little normalizing technique and reframing. You're understanding the reasoning why you were doing it in this instance. It's something you acknowledge. It's not great, but you know the reason why you're doing it, versus kind of sometimes if you go through life kind of with and I feel like I've gone through this at certain years, like I've just had the blinkers on, like, have I really been thinking about the actions that I'm taking, or am I just kind of like going with the flow, if you want to say it, lack of a better phrase? You're really putting yourself into the present moment and being really attuned to the actions you're taking and why you're doing it.
Yes. And this, again, very simple terms, because eating a donut is not necessarily a traumatic experience. But in this example, you could have that post-traumatic growth of whatever you were experiencing by acknowledging this is not ideal, but it's the best I can do right now. Then you can have some of that post-traumatic growth of, okay, wow, I had this experience. It was awful. And now I'm past it, and I can start thinking about ways to heal more effectively, how to move through suffering without, again, you don't want any of that self-depreciation. You don't want any of that guilt to linger on, or you don't even want to normalize it of like, oh, this is just what I do. I eat a donut when I'm stressed. You want to kind of separate yourself from, I am not this person. The person I am has bigger goals. It's just right now, this is the best I can do, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love it. We've definitely, I know it was probably about 15 minutes ago at this stage, Ray, but you were going to get into the practical strategies. I feel like with the way our conversation's gone, we've probably dipped into a bit of them. So if you have to repeat some things, that's perfectly okay. But my question for you is, what are some practical strategies for suffering effectively?
This is one of my favorite activities. I call it like a mini self-audit. And you can do this for literally any situation where you're suffering. So you can change it to like a work situation, a family situation, relationship, life, personal, whatever it is, you can use this technique. I encourage people to write these things down, because there's lots of research on the power of writing and how it ingrains it a bit more effectively than typing or texting or even just saying or thinking it. By writing it down, you're really making it real. I guess that's not super researchy, but that's the base of it. So there are 4 questions that I like to ask for this mini life audit. Is the first one is, what are my top 3 core values? And if you don't know what core values are, you don't even know where to start. There are lots of websites, there are lots of resources that just list values, and you can kind of go through them. There are quizzes out there you can take, and they'll give you an idea of what's most meaningful to you. Again, you don't have to be an expert on this stuff to just kind of figure out what are the top 3 core values that you have, these guiding posts in your life. The second question is, what's going well in life or situation or whatever it is? What is going well in this scenario? What do I like most about it? What do I hope continues? And writing those things down, really even if it's something silly. Again, it's a very personal experience. It's what do you like? Number 3 is, what do you not like? What is not going well? What is causing me to suffer? Why do I hate this? Why do I want to blame everybody? What is going on? What do I not want to continue? So writing those things down. And then the 4th step is envisioning this dream situation, this dream life, this dream job, this dream relationship, whatever it is. And then what are you doing? What's your contribution in this? Of like, how do you show up every day? And what's so great about it? Again, not from a societal standpoint. This is not anybody's vision but yours. So writing down those 4 steps. Once you have those 4 things written out, you look at it from, does number 3, what's going or what's not going well, does that conflict with number 1, your core values? And if it does, that's a completely separate issue. That's not something you can continue. That misalignment right there tells you the answer of how to move through suffering. You have to get out of that situation because it does not align with your core values, and you're not going to change your core values, but you can change the situation, especially if they're deal breakers. The next question you ask is, can you get some sort of version of your dream by staying the course? Because if you can, then again, that's readjusting your expectations, realigning to what is the current scenario, and I'm moving towards some version of my reality that I want, and that's okay. And then the last question I ask is, what are the things that are going well enough to motivate you through the challenges ahead? So if you've got a few things that you like, but a lot of things you don't, are those few things that you like strong enough to get you past the suffering or through this suffering? Are they are you willing to suffer for them? And that's when you assess your needs, you take action accordingly, and then you can help others if they come across a similar situation.
Really fascinating. I'm going to try and flip this and put this into the question section of the app for people on Noon Vibe and on our social media as well, because I think those questions are very valid. I can see 2 things. I can see number 1, writing them on paper allows you to just pull back slightly. You're still entrenched. It's still very much you, but it might allow you to see a small bit more objectively. The other thing was like, what if you make out, say, the list of things you don't like? And what if that is absolutely ginormous to the point you might be like, oh, what's the point? There's too much stuff here for me to... I'm just curious if you've ever experienced that or how you could advise someone to not feel that sense of overwhelm.
Absolutely. So that's another part of getting it out, is once it's out, you don't have to hold space for it in you. It's out. This is all the truth right here. There's no hiding from it. It's not a secret. It's 6 pages worth of things that I absolutely am suffering through, and I hate it. That's when you look at it as, what would you have to change in order to feel more motivated, engaged, enthusiastic, or fulfilled? Again, it goes back to you. Suffering is something that we can control and we can change. And I'm not making light of that, because some changes are very hard, and sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. But if you have this long list of things that you absolutely hate and you're just feeling stuck, you're going to continue to have this long list, and nothing's going to change if you don't change. You have to take control of some of those things.
Yeah, and kind of to my converse point on that too, I think if you ask anyone here in this conversation listening now, if you said, tell me something good about yourself, people might struggle. They might come out with one thing saying, oh, I'm funny, or like go to the gym, or I'm athletic. But if you ask someone to say, like, tell me something not so good about yourself, I think people can like rattle off, oh, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this. So we tend to have like a negativity bias as well. Would you have any advice for people when it comes to listing out the good things, like how they can do that in a very kind of honest manner, and maybe not be afraid to list them out as well? Like, it's okay to be boastful, especially when you're doing this introspectively to yourself.
So I think, one, doing it often. The more frequently we do it, the more challenged we are by it, but the easier it is. Like, we can start thinking broader the more frequently we do this, because if you just keep coming to the paper and you have the same thing that's going well and nothing's ever adding to it, it doesn't feel very motivating to keep going. And it goes back to, well, now I have to change. I also want to emphasize, be kind to yourself. Like, it's okay if you're just coming up with 50 negative things and one positive thing initially. That we're wired that way. Like, we are wired towards the negative because it's what keeps us alive. It's what keeps us pushing towards more. Because if we were happy and content with everything all the time, there would be no progress, there would be no change. The lion coming toward us would not scare us. Like, none of these things would keep us alive and well. So practicing that self-compassion, it's very cyclical. So if you're seeing like have a lot of negative stuff, practice self-compassion. That's okay. I'm okay. Then you start to find more positive stuff. And then again, you're going back, oh, I'm feeling really negative again. Practice that self-compassion. You'll find more positive stuff. And it just kind of keeps moving you forward inch by inch.
You've kind of mentioned as we're talking that suffering can be a catalyst for growth as well. And if I make a connection to a conversation recently I had with Dr. Andreas Michaelitis, who's the chief psychologist here at Noom as well, he mentioned, is it Yerkes Dobson's law? So essentially, it's in terms of arousal, but there's an optimal level of like arousal, or in this case, you could substitute it with stress. I'm sure you could substitute it with suffering as well. That there's kind of a little bit of suffering can be used advantageously, like to grow and develop. But if you're suffering too much, then you're in the realm of like anxiety and you're really struggling. Or if you're suffering too little, you're not being kind of, we'll say, like you're not under enough kind of stress or suffering to be able to move and grow, kind of to your point. Like we need to, we're constantly evolving, constantly developing, and maybe need it. And yeah, does that law apply to this aspect of suffering?
Absolutely. And again, very high level. I'm sure if we get into the nitty gritty, there's going to be some differences. But suffering, it's inevitable, just like stress, and you can have varying levels of it. But just like with stress, it's not the end of the story unless you just unpack and live there, and then you're not effectively suffering. You've just chosen to suffer. That's your choice. So suffering, again, we don't want it, but it's not something we can avoid. So accepting the fact that it is part of life, and then knowing that it's coming, giving yourself some healthy coping techniques, and knowing that you should care the most about your life. No one should care about you more than you do. You can't pour from that empty cup. Same with stress, is like if you're not consistently, even when you're not in, I'm all over the place here, when you're not in times of suffering, similar to when you're not in times of stress, you should be practicing techniques and self-care, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And then when that stress or suffering comes, you will have been practicing these things the whole time. So by taking that regular inventory of what's going well, what you can improve, what you can control, what your ultimate goals are, you're really setting yourself up for success when you do come across suffering.
Yeah, so you can be always in almost like a proactive state. It's always, it kind of just seems it can tie in very naturally to just continually working on self-development and self-growth, right? I think if you're working on that stuff, you might naturally be working on what you're speaking of here.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, it can be maybe a US specific thing. I actually think it's more like a Western world specific thing. But I think many people today might struggle with the idea of suffering. There might be some sort of cultural narratives around powering through, or like doing it yourself, or pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, kind of all these kind of colloquial terms that are being used. Like, how do you feel that feeds into how we can navigate suffering in today's world?
It makes me so sad that's true. That's 100% true. As a culture, I'm in the United States. From my experience, we do not suffer effectively, and we do not grieve effectively either. It's almost any negative emotion that comes through. It's like, oh, I've got it. I'm gonna chuck it in my bag, and I'm just gonna carry this bag around with me everywhere. But I'm never gonna open it. I'm never gonna address anything that's in my bag, and it just becomes incredibly heavy and ineffective all around. It's just a big bag of emotions that we were either taught, we just weren't taught how to handle, address. As a culture, I don't think we even have a vocabulary for some of the things that we feel. And if we don't know how to explain it, it's very hard to address it. Again, like you're saying, there's so many cultural norms, but like you said, just power through, just like get over it, just figure it out. You still got stuff to do. It makes all that stuff so much harder if we don't take time to work through the issue at hand. One of one of my favorite sayings is, I need to go work off some of my duck energy. So ducks, the animal, when they get in a little kerfuffle with other ducks, you've seen it. They flap their wings and they fly away and then they skid across the water. That's their duck energy. They're getting out that emotional stress, that emotional response that they were suffering, and then they worked through it effectively, got rid of it, and then they're fine to just float around. So whenever I feel that I'm suffering, I have to go work off my duck energy. Like I have to get it out of me and not put it in a bag. And whatever that looks like for people, it's going to be unique to them, but we have to acknowledge the fact that we're stuffing it in a bag versus working off our duck energy first. And I don't know if everybody's ready for that, but once we get to that point, it's going to make life so much easier.
Yeah, and that can be tough for people too. It could be a lot easier just to stuff it into the bag, as I said, with all the societal pressures that we're maybe faced with, just with how busy life is. And sometimes it feels like there's no escape and there's no changing. Like an example could be maybe you're in a job you dislike, but it pays the bills. I can't leave it, so I'm just going to settle for it's okay. It's fine. Or sometimes it can be really hard to kind of get out of that just, I don't want to call it a spiral, but just life in general. Like it is kind of set up in a way that just has us stuck there, and it can feel like it's impossible to get out as well.
Yes, I'm trying to see here. I wrote about this. It's prospect theory. That's what it is. So like we undervalue change and overestimate failure. That goes back to like we are programmed to be negative, and that's okay. That's just how we're programmed. But if you run through that list of things and you're finding that you're settling, that's like just one step above suffering because you're not really happy, and there is a potential for positive change. Not saying like quit your job tomorrow and just hope for the best. Like you can take calculated moves to change for the better, and just realize that again, nobody's going to care about your life as much as you care about your life. And if you're not where you want to be, you can get there through calculated incremental change, and just knowing that it's not the end. Like if you leave one job you hate for another job you hate, well, there's a billion other jobs. That just keep going, and you learn things along the way. Take what you've learned, apply it as you move forward.
The hundreds of people listening here now are all quitting their jobs as we speak, right into their
Please don't do
managers.
that.
They're like, I'm out. Rae, what for, like, maybe for someone who is currently going through a tough time, what would be your top piece of advice on how to suffer effectively and maybe come out stronger on the other side?
I think the first step is just to acknowledge that you're suffering, acknowledge that this is a hard time, and not in a judgmental way. It is a moment of suffering, but that does not mean I am the sufferer. I am not causing this suffering. I am just feeling this suffering. Emotions, you feel what you feel when you feel it, but don't unpack and live there. Like this is not the rest of your life. This is a moment of suffering. You're going to learn through it. You're going to grow from it. I think that initial suffering, or if you're caught in a cycle of ineffective suffering, just acknowledge it. That's so powerful to be like, this is not what I want. I am suffering right now. What's next? Like feel those feelings, and then you can start moving from it. If we don't even know, and we're just living in this state of, I hate everything, everything's always miserable, this is just what life is, we're living from that ego point of like, it's everyone else's problem, I am just in it. But acknowledging this is suffering, and that's part of life, can be so powerful.
In terms of energies, if you do have that mindset of, we'd say, playing the victim or everything's always goes wrong for me, does that attract more energy of the same ilk or same negativity?
It can. It can also turn off a lot of people who would be willing to help if you were to take accountability, or just ask for space to be heard. Because again, nobody wants to be around people who are constantly dumping out what's inside of them, especially if it's not positive. But I think it's a very isolated experience, because if you do surround yourself with other people who are blaming, they're all individuals just blaming everybody else. There's no real connection there. There's no real authenticity, and there's no real progress. It's just breeding more of itself without any effective change or or support.
Yeah, it sounds like I could see you kind of getting trapped kind of in that realm as well. And like you said, you're just breeding more of that kind of negativity with the people around you as well. And yeah, nothing's been solved. It's just all kind of blame games and you're kind of stuck in that moment.
Yes, and it's hard. It is so hard to get out of that. And from a perspective of someone who's used to defaulting to that, it may seem like more suffering to bite your tongue or, go introvertedly and figuring out, okay, what is my contribution to this? It may cause more suffering initially, but again, suffering is hard. It is part of life, and it's just developing those healthy coping techniques and healthy mechanisms to move through it. Acknowledge it, accept it, and move on. It sounds so easy, but I really don't want to discount the fact that it's not. It is so hard to pause, accept, and it's not fast, it's not easy, but it makes a world of difference because you're not carrying 30 years worth of suffering around with you. You handle each situation as it comes, and you become more resilient and capable with every situation you come up against.
Yeah, it's kind of like sometimes I like to equate like humans and things that happen to entropy. Like you're probably going to go through all possibilities. And the example you said there, you actually mentioned like 30 years of suffering. Like as things build up over the long period of time, there's a lot of directions you can go with that. You can choose to look at the world from kind of that negative lens that everything is going wrong, it's happening to me, like this is not fair, this is cruel. Or you can choose to, like you said, unpack that bag and try and resolve and solve through those issues, and then see life through a different light as well. So I can see how over time things could build up, and it could be really, really difficult for someone.
Absolutely. And that goes back to seeking support. Depending on the types of stuff that you want to unpack and work through, don't do it alone. It can be real heavy and real hard. And if you didn't have the tools to work through it before, you probably don't have the tools to work through all of it now. And that's okay. Just acknowledging what do you need and where do you get it. There are wonderful people out in the helping profession that are willing to help and work through whatever ails you. You just got to be willing to ask for help.
Rae, as we wind down, are there any other key takeaways you feel that our listeners should be left with here today?
Oh, there's so many things. I feel like I could talk about this all day. I absolutely love exploring this topic because again, it's not something that people talk about. We don't want to suffer. It's like how to avoid suffering, not suffer.
Yes.
But suffering, it can help you in so many ways if you just acknowledge and accept it. The ultimate goal is to find joy where you can, to bring more of that joy and happiness into your life. But you have to be intentional about creating those comforts and curiosities in the life that you want. Because if you just have this bag of discomforts and suffering that you're carrying around with you, it makes it very hard to climb up, to move on, any of those things. It's not just a mindset, I would say. It's an intentional alignment with the reality and your expectations. And sometimes that requires quite frequent self-audits of realizing this is the reality of the situation and this is how I'm reacting to it. How can I put them back into alignment to be the person that I want to be? So I guess I would leave people with like incremental shifts are really powerful. It takes consistent effort to suffer effectively, but it doesn't have to be hard. It just little incremental steps can make all the difference.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And what stood out to me really was around the misalignment, and I love the practical advice part we talked about with those practical questions to ask. And for our listeners here, I will put them on our social media, and I'll get them onto Noom Vibe as well, because like they're really valuable, and it is really important, I think, to be able to know your core beliefs and values in order to understand, am I in misalignment or am I not as well? So yeah, I think that was a definite standout for me. And I fully agree with you, Rae. Like we've somehow done an hour here in what felt like 4 minutes. So it's such a really important topic. And like you said, it's one that's a bit tabooed, and people, through what, as we discussed, societal pressures and just maybe like fear of dealing with difficult emotions, like we tend to just shy away from it. But we could actually use it as kind of a tool in our toolbox, as something like really positive towards our self-development and self-growth too. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to discuss. I feel like we can definitely reconvene this podcast at a later date to do even a deeper dive into how to suffer effectively. But just on behalf of myself and our listeners, like, thank you. We really do appreciate you jumping on and sharing your your expertise with us. I at this point, we have about a minute left. If you want to let people know about maybe your blog or where they can find you and keep in touch with you, you can do that right now.
Absolutely. One, thank you so much for inviting me here, and for all the listeners who stuck through it. I really hope that people are going to think about some things today and maybe jot some notes down, and circle back and review those questions when they're ready. I just launched, like last night, it just launched my website. So it's aliveandwellish.com. It's work in progress, but it has my journals listed. There's links at the top on Amazon. You can purchase those. They're self-guided journals about how to set goals. And if you go to the gym, it's a gym journal that is so helpful for people like me who squirrel all over the place.
But Rae, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. All right, folks, thanks again. And I will be back with you at our regular time tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern. Hope you got a lot out of today. I know I certainly did, and have a load of key takeaways from Rae. Feel free to click the follow button underneath my name so we can continue to spread the good word and continue to build out this wonderful community. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can click on my name, click on my link tree, and there is a link to all my social media as well. All the support definitely helps, and Rae's episode will be aired on the social media at a later time, TBD. And of course, it is live to you right now, Noom Vibe. Thanks, folks. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.